that book for me. I mean, I do feel that way. I'm excited about Romans. But for me, that book, that Mount Everest of preaching is Leviticus. I am super excited. I told, like when we were talking about, we were talking about recently, and Pastor Billy was deciding what he was going to preach next, and I was like, you can have anything except for Leviticus. You can't take Leviticus from me. I want to preach Leviticus. And so I'm very excited to preach Leviticus, and which might seem like it has nothing to do with this morning. But, and I still don't know when. I don't know when I'm going to preach Leviticus. Who knows? Well, I'm not ready. Maybe I am. We'll see. But if you go in Leviticus, and so much of Leviticus is opaque to us. But if you go, and I think I've asked this question before, so some of you might immediately remember the answer. If you immediately remember the answer because we've had this discussion before, let other people think about it for a second. If you go to the book of Leviticus and you wanted to reinstitute the sacrificial system, if today, tomorrow, we wanted to reinstitute the sacrificial system, we couldn't do it with just the book of Leviticus. We can't do it because of salvation history. We can't do it because we know that these things have found their fulfillment, they have found their culmination and their conclusion in Christ. But if hypothetically you wanted to, if you wanted to perform the sacrifices, if you wanted to perform temple worship, you could not do it just with Leviticus. Leviticus does not give you enough information. What is conspicuously absent from the book of Leviticus, which you would need to know. You would need to know if you were going to perform the sacrifices, which actually, Leviticus being all about the sacrifices, it does not tell you. Try to think. And once you say it, once it's said, you go, oh, of course. What is missing that if you wanted to perform the sacrifices, the temple worship, the ritual in the book of Leviticus, you can't do it without it. And Leviticus does not give it to you. No, Leviticus talks plenty about the priesthood. It talks about how to ordain priests. It talks about what they have to do to get ready. It talks about their qualifications. Say that again? No, Leviticus talks about how to interact. You don't have the permanent temple yet, but you have the tabernacle. Leviticus deals with the tabernacle. The songs and prayers, what do you actually say? At no point in Leviticus does it tell you specifically what, and right? Like we understand people didn't come silently and have like a 1 hour silent sacrifice. Like obviously there was things being said. And Leviticus doesn't tell you. It doesn't tell you what was said. In fact, there is very little in terms of explicit liturgy in the Pentateuch. That was just assumed. It was assumed that the people knew and the people understand. And one of the things, now connecting and seeing why this is relevant, one of the things the book of Psalms is temple liturgy. One of the things the book of Psalms supplies is the types of things that were said and were sung during accompanying sacrifice. This is actually a very important context. And so if you are just joining us or if you haven't been with us for a while, we're currently doing 12-ish weeks on Psalms and wisdom literature. So we're looking at the book of Psalms, the book of Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, Song of Songs, and Job. Surveying these 5 books, diving in deep. We spent the last 2 weeks with just a general introduction to poetry in the Bible in particular. And thinking about some of the unique things about the genre of poetry, some of the unique things that poetry accomplishes, and then some of the unique ways that particularly ancient Hebrew poetry worked. And focusing largely on parallelism, this tendency to write in paired lines and couplets. All because most of the books we're looking at, not quite all of it, but most of these 5 books are written in poetry. These are the poetic books par excellence of Scripture. And so now we're going to come and zone in on the Psalms. And so what we'll do is we'll have classes where we're kind of overviewing the books as a whole. We'll pick some key issues and kind of work through them relative to the books. And then we'll also have some classes where we'll take 1 or 2 passages and we'll just kind of dive deep and get a taste, right? Like I can't just tease you about how awesome these books are without some time actually spent inside them. So we will do that. And so today we're now coming to Psalms. We're introducing the book as a whole. And one of the things we want to consider as we look at Psalms is our ever-present adage, and it's ever-present and cliched because it's true, which is context is king. Or another way we say this is, there's 3 C's of interpreting, and the 3 C's are context, context, context. Context is important. And when we come to any book, there are different levels of context. We have things like historical context, right? Spelling. We have the historical context. We will have literary context. So when I think historical context, I'm thinking things like the situation at the time of composition, or conversely, the situation at the time of whatever the writing describes, because the time of composition and the time of whatever it describes are not always the same, right? You can write a book about Civil War now, and so you have 2 different historical contexts to consider. If you read a book that I write about the Civil War, you have the actual historical context of the Civil War, and then you have my context to consider and why I'm writing about it and what's going on. So you have historical context, you have literary context, where you're actually considering the different pieces of the work itself. So in the case of Psalms, when you're reading any one psalm, you have the rest of the book of the Psalms to consider, but you also have the wider biblical poetic corpus to consider, genre and things like that. You have we often don't consider this, but it is important. You have the physical context as well. And a lot of this we have partial access to. So you have physical context. So this would include just the reality of what it means to be human and living life. So particularly in the ancient Near East, there's going to be a lot that's different than our modern life. But we have access to it, and we have imaginations. And so you're able to understand that even if you don't live a primarily, you don't live a life where there's a lot of manual labor. You're still able to understand, at least in part, what a life of manual labor is like, because you still have a body. You still know what it feels like to lift things. You still know what it feels like to get tired. And so you have to consider their context and your context, but then there's plenty that we share in common. We bleed when we get cut. It hurts when you break a bone, right? Like we have all these things. And we don't often consciously think about physical context, but that is something we consider, particularly as we read ancient things. And Scripture is an ancient word from God to us, ever present, always relevant, but given to us in a time far separated from where we are now. So as we come to the Psalms, we consider historical context, we consider literary context, we consider physical context, and one of the contexts that is important in all of this would, depending on how you parse it, you can put this as a separate category, you can put this under historical context, social context, and particularly religious, right? How was this particular piece of writing, how is this particular piece of Scripture intended to function, right? The book of Proverbs has a different intended function than the book of Genesis does. Right? The book of Psalms has a different intended function than the book of Kings does. So how did it function? So one of the important contexts for the book of Psalms is the fact that as a book, it was intended to function as a songbook, as supplying liturgy, as supplying the types of things that were said during worship. Not just before sacrifice, sometimes very clearly during. Like this song was meant to be sung in the process of performing a sacrifice. And so this is one of those contexts as we come to the book of Psalms. Questions at this point? And again, as always, you may stop me at any point and ask questions. If I use a word that you're not familiar with, or if I just say something and I'm not being clear or I'm rambling, please stop me and I will try to do better. As we consider context, one of the things that we'll look at today, so there are a few things that I want to hit before we kind of dive into any specific Psalms, and a big part of today will be a couple of types of context. Literary context, we'll be thinking about genre a little bit more. We'll think about the authorship, these types of things, history. I don't know how much time I want to spend on that because a lot of it is, the kind of apologetic questions. How do we defend things like Davidic authorship? But also, we want to think about the Psalms as a whole book. And so that's next week. Next week, we will look at the Psalms as a unity, right? As a collection. Because there's actually shape to it. It's not just randomly put together. It is not just a collection. It is an intentionally shaped collection. And so we'll be considering that next week. So this week, we'll think about historical context, genre, authorship, these types of things. When we think about literary context, I keep using the word genre, and what I mean by that is the Psalms are poetry. We know that, right? Or songs. They're poetry and songs. And so that's like macro level genre. We can distinguish between prose, narrative, a story, and we can distinguish between poetry. However, then we can talk even more specifically, because within the big genre of poetry, there's all sorts of different types of poetry. There's all sorts of different genres within that bigger category of genre. So broadly speaking, we have songs in the book of Psalms. We have poems. But narrowly, we can start to think of like what types. There are different types of Psalms that people have recognized, which is to say, different genres. Different genres, which is just a way of saying shapes, forms, I will put heavily in quotes, standard. Which is, if you spent any amount of time reading the Psalms, you will probably on your own intuitively, even if you've never worded it this way, notice that a lot of Psalms sound similar. They have a similar structure. You have a psalm that will start with a complaint, and then it will move to a petition. They will say, this is going wrong. Then it will say, please help me in this way. And then it will end with thanksgiving. Thank you for helping me. And so you will find that pattern repeated. Like, oh, that exact same sequence is in this psalm, and it's in this psalm, and it's in this psalm. And so one of the things we do as we consider genres is we recognize, oh yeah, there seem to be different types of psalms. There seems to be different forms that the authors like to use. You will have heard of some of these. In fact, give me some. Even if you feel like, I don't know what title or word, just what types of psalms exist? So imprecatory psalms, psalms of lament. Others? Praise, yeah, that feels weird to say. Like, oh, it's just, aren't they all praise? But there is kind of a generic shape of praise. We'll talk about this just in a little bit to help distinguish what do we mean when we label a psalm praise. Aren't they all praise? Any others come to mind? There are psalms of confession. And we might distinguish thanksgiving. And how do we distinguish praise and thanksgiving? Praise tends to be generic, like we're just celebrating who God is, what he's done. He's creator, he's king, he's sovereign, he's good, he's wise, he's just. Whereas thanksgiving tends to focus on something specific that God has done, some specific deliverance, right? Specific deliverance. Yes, there are. They're few and far between. I can only think of two off the top of my head that really kind of do any sort of narrative recounting. But you do have some. I think we would just kind of put these, broadly under either praise or thanksgiving, and we'll see why there is wiggle room here in a moment. Generic celebration of God. And so we're able to label them, right? We're able to look at Psalms and be like, well, these ones are all kind of the same in this way. And so not only is it topic, right? It's also shape. However, when we recognize a genre, when we say, in biblical scholarship, we talk about the forms, the different forms that the Psalms have. When we talk about these forms, it's important to understand that this is an after-the-fact description, right? This is us looking at all the Psalms and saying, oh, these three are all kind of the same, and these four are all kind of the same. These forms did not necessarily consciously exist in the sense of like, oh, I'm sitting down, I'm going to write a Thanksgiving psalm, and I know a Thanksgiving psalm has to start this way, have this, it has to have this at the beginning, this part 2, this part 3, this part 4, and in fact, you will notice as you read, like, any one given psalm will often deviate from the wider pattern, right? So the pattern is something that, in a sense, we kind of impose. We kind of recognize and say. And so then what's the point? If this pattern is kind of external and it's maybe not internal into the mind of the author as he's writing, why do we recognize this? Well, because this is an important part of the literary context. This is actually helpful as we, and we'll see why. It is helpful to recognize different types of psalms because one of the things when you read any given part of Scripture, right? You're reading any given part of Scripture and you're considering context, right? I want to understand this, so I want to think about its context. One of your contexts is your literary context, and one of your literary context realities is other psalms that will fit this kind of general picture, right? And here's where it's particularly helpful is in, so when you're reading any psalm, okay, I read Psalm 88, and Psalm 88 is a psalm of lament. One of the things I'm going to do as I'm reading Psalm 88, not always, but if you have questions particularly, and we should always have questions, but if you're reading a psalm and you have a question of interpretation, what does this mean? There are really two places to immediately go for an answer. I'm not saying you'll always find the answer to whatever your question is, but you're reading a psalm and you have a particular question. Like there's a line, there's a word, or there's a whole little section that you're like, I don't know what this means. I'm really struggling with it. There are two primary places I would go as my first bet. Like this is my first attempt to try to answer any question that I have. Guesses. Where are the two places that I would go to try to, I'm reading any psalm, we'll just say 88. I'm reading Psalm 88. Where else will I go if I want to answer a question? Huh? Say that again? Leviticus. I will end up in Leviticus often when I'm reading the Psalms. However, that's not the first place I'm going to go. The Psalm above and below. So your first is your near context. The Psalm above and below. I'm going to look at Psalm 87. I'm going to look at Psalm 90 and see if something about one of those somehow helps clarify. And you will be surprised how often you will get exactly that. You will get some sort of clarification. They are ordered in the way they are ordered intentionally. So if I have something in Psalm 88 that I don't understand, I'm going to look at Psalm 87 and Psalm 90 first. Secondly, the very next place I'm going to go is other psalms of the similar type. So I'm going to look at the Psalm above and below, and I'm going to look at other, in the case of Psalm 88, other laments. If I don't know what's going on in 88, I'm going to look at the psalms that are most like it and see if there's something that is unpacked more or something that's said in a different way that clarifies. Right? And so our big payoff for recognizing the different genres is that we can compare. We can compare. We know. There are all sorts of resources. Basically, any commentary you buy, any sort of book or introduction to the psalm is by and large going to label all the psalms for you, and you can kind of flip, through like, okay, I'm reading this psalm. What other psalms are going to be near it or like it? And I just did it myself. At one time when I was 18 or 19, I read on one of my reads through the psalms. In my olive tree, I use olive tree, and I just labeled. I read the psalm, and when I was done, I was like, I just gave it a label that made the most sense to me. I was like, this psalm was about Thanksgiving. This psalm was a lament. And then when I was done, I now have every psalm labeled in my thing, so I could just digitally, I can say, I want to read all the lament psalms, and I press my button, and it pulls all the ones I've labeled lament. Right? So you have access to this type of information in all sorts of ways. I can give you resources to help. But when you're reading, you have it is a useful tool. Again, it's not going to answer every question always, but quite often. And particularly, you're going to find when you're comparing them, when you're comparing two psalms, a lot of times, as is often the case, the most meat, I don't know if this is the right way to say it, but the most meat, the most payoff, the most interpretive payoff is when you find significant differences. What do I mean by this? I don't mean like contradictions. I mean this psalm, let's say you're reading a psalm of thanksgiving, right? And I want to enrich my reading of this psalm, so I read all the other psalms of thanksgiving. Say I'm reading one psalm and I look at 8 other psalms. And then I go, wait. These 8 all do this one thing, and this one doesn't. It does something different, right? Often you're going to find much meat there, much to chew on when you notice a difference, a significant difference. So for example, I've used this already. You already know this. Psalm 88. Psalm 88 is a psalm of lament. It is actually different than every other psalm of lament. Actually, there might be one other that's kind of close. But for the most part, it is different than every other psalm of lament. Why? Does anyone remember? Why is Psalm 88 a lament? So it's crying out. It's in the just vernacular, complaining. A song where the psalmist is complaining. Life is hard. This situation is happening to me. I'm miserable. I need help. This is horrible. My life is darkness. It's a psalm of complaint. How is it different? Does anyone remember how Psalm 88 different than every other psalm of lament? It ends in darkness. There's no happy ending. Every other song of lament has a resolution that we would, it ends either hopeful or, if not, having experienced, right? Because sometimes it's like a past tense narration. Sometimes your songs of lament have like a movement towards, and then God, like, I cry out and God rescues me, and then I respond with thanksgiving and praise, and you have like a full-fledged, not narrative, but like arc. You have a full-fledged arc within the psalm. And even if you don't have that full arc of like, there was rescue, now I'm responding, usually the Psalms of Lament end with at least hope. If I haven't experienced that rescue yet, it ends with, I am hopeful though. I know I'm going to experience that rescue. I trust God. Conversely, you have Psalm 88. Let's just read. I'll read just a little bit of Psalm 88. It's longer. I'll read towards the end, but also nothing before this is any different. The last stanza of Psalm 88 says, O Lord, I cry to you. In the morning my prayer comes to you, but why do you cast my soul away? Why do you hide your face from me? Afflicted and close to death from my youth up, I suffer your terrors. I am helpless. Your wrath has swept over me. Your dreadful assaults destroy me. They surround me like a flood all day long. They close in on me together. You have caused my beloved and my friend to shun me. My companions have become darkness. And that's the end. That's the end of Psalm 88. And you read that, and the first time you read it, and you're like, this is different than every other psalm. There are lots of psalms where the language is very bleak, and the complaints are very raw. And there's usually a little more hope at the end. This one doesn't. And so you're reading Psalm 88, and you recognize that, and you're like, okay, there's meat here. There's something to chew on. There is something here. There is something very intentionally done, right? You know the author of Psalm 88. Do we know him? He said Korah, one of the sons of Korah. You know the author of Psalm 88 knows exactly what he's doing. He knows exactly what he's doing, and he's doing that intentionally. He's doing that for you to have this. Yes, Trita. To a certain extent. So we're going to consider that too. So if you didn't hear Trita, she said, man, it would be nice if we knew circumstances, right? It would be nice if we knew circumstances. To a certain extent. So, I'm going to erase this now. We have these different genres, and we can compare. But another thing that is an important context, in terms of historical context, is the things like the authors, the situations. Now, we know for a large chunk of the Psalter who the author was. Who is our statistically authored most of the Psalms? Not your question. Yeah, David, right? So if we think about things like author, for the Psalms, we have two levels, right? We have the author and we have the, redactors, the wrong word. Compiler? Editor. There we go. That's the word I wanted. You have the author, writes a psalm, and you have the editor, put them in collections. And this might be editors plural, right? Because the book of Psalms is actually organized into 5 books. Most people, not everyone, but most people think those 5 books existed independently at some point, and then they were further gathered into one big book. And so you have the person who's actually gathering them and putting them together and putting them in order, and then you have the author of each individual psalm. And for Psalms, statistically, David authored the most. Does anyone know how many? Actually, I don't know if I know how many. You'll supply information for us. No? I think it's 73. I think it's 70, low 70s. I think it's 73. And then we have, some groups, sons of Korah, one by Moses, one by Solomon. But as we consider the Psalms, we do. So we have this context, and these superscriptions, right? When I say superscription, I'm talking about that part above the Psalm that says something like a song, a psalm of the sons of Korah to the choir master, according to the Mahalath Leannot, a maskil of Heman the Ezraite, right? Those things at the top of the Psalms that are usually put in either italics or, small caps. They're set apart. They're not put as part of the text. Those superscriptions are super, super important. So when we talk about historical context, our main source is the superscriptions. This is besides the rest of the Bible, which helps fill in the superscriptions, but our main source are the superscriptions. This is literally my least favorite convention of modern English Bibles. My least favorite convention of modern English Bibles is how we print the superscriptions. Actually, there's even a translation, I'm forgetting which one it is. There is a modern English Bible that does not have them. They're not.
Like you have like an added header.
Yeah. Okay.
And the actual biblical.
That too. And this is why. Okay. So some Bibles don't even put the super. So when you're reading the Bible in almost any English Bible translation, anywhere, you just flip anywhere. We have all these like bold titles, right? Luke 20 is titled "The Coming of the Kingdom." Luke 17:20. Luke 17:5 is titled "Increase Our Faith." This paragraph is entitled "Unworthy Servants." Right? So you have these bold titles for paragraphs, and does every psalm have one? At least in the ESV, it looks like every psalm is given a title. Every psalm is given a title, and it's printed in bold italics in the ESV. That is not a superscription. Those are editorial additions just to help organize the Bible and just to help your eyes scan it quickly, because if it was just a block of text, that would be overwhelming. That's their function. I'm flipping through and I'm trying to find the section I'm looking for, and it's like David and Goliath. Oh, there, right? Like that title, David and Goliath, is just added for our convenience. The superscriptions, which in the Psalms are under the titles, they're before verse 1, but they're under the titles. They're not written in bold in the ESV, they're written in all caps. The superscriptions look like, when we print them this way, editorial additions. They look like something that was just added to help us organize or maybe supply some context. Like, okay, this was written, was that yours? Sorry. This was written, like Psalm 51. Psalm 51, the superscription says, a psalm of David when he went into Bathsheba and Nathan the prophet confronted him. And so we read those superscriptions, and it's very easy to look like that is something that has just been added by some editor, some modern editor, as a guess or as maybe helpful information. And so this is my least favorite convention of modern English Bibles, because that is not true. The superscriptions are part of the text. They are part of the inspired text of the Bible. We do not have a single, not one, we do not have a single ancient copy of the Psalms that does not have the superscriptions. We have no version of any psalm that does not include the superscriptions. In every single manuscript, in every single fragment, in every single leaflet that we find and we dig up in the dirt, every psalm has its superscription. So when we print them separately, it makes it look like this was something that a modern English editor added, but that's not true. In fact, in the Hebrew numbering, the superscription is always verse 1. It's always verse 1. It makes my job difficult. That's my other reason why it annoys me. It makes my job difficult as a Psalm scholar because when I write, the verse, and when I study, my verse numbers in the Psalms are not the same as the ones that's like I'm always having to translate. It's like verse 3. It's like, no, it's not verse 3 in English. It's what, verse 4? I always have to change it because it's different. The Hebrew numbering always numbers superscript as verse 1 because they are part of the text. We have no evidence of the Psalms ever existing without the superscripts. None whatsoever. Not only do we have no evidence of the Psalms not existing without the superscripts, we have lots of evidence that the superscripts may have been from the very beginning, like from the very first time it was published. Because there's still this sense of yeah, but that wasn't there the very first time it was penned. Like when David penned this, we didn't have the superscripts. But there is evidence that from the very first moment that after this is penned, the second it's being delivered to the public, a superscript is being put on because we have Babylonian hymns. We have Akkadian hymns. We have hymns from other cultures at the same times. We have other hymns in the Bible. They all have superscripts. They all have superscripts published with them from the very beginning. Desiree, I saw a hand. It's because of a bias that assumes these must be additions. These must be additions. These must be something that came later. But even if that were true, right? Because when it comes to certain books, not only do we have an author, we also have an editor. And a good, robust doctrine of inspiration and the authority of Scripture accounts for editors, accounts for inspired editors. Give me another example of a book that must have, we know for a fact, like the Bible tells us, has editors plural, and maybe a final editor. Say, that's not what I'm thinking. Nope. Huh? Not in the New Testament. I'm still thinking Old Testament. Nope. Like that, like people think that, but I'm saying it 100%. 100% this book had an editor, editors plural, Proverbs. Proverbs tells you this is a collection from this, Hezekiah made this collection. It tells you these are Solomon's, and we know that they were all organized and brought together as a book. So you know the person who wrote the individual Proverbs, you know various people who made certain collections within the book, and you know that there was someone who brought them all together and made it into one book. And so you have inspired editors. So even if the superscriptions were not original to the very first second the psalm was written, right? It's still part of the text as it has been delivered to us. It's still part of the text as under God's authority and sovereign control of history. We have no copies of the Psalms without them. None whatsoever. They are always attached. And so there is this kind of bias, though, against them, that where this assumption that but they must have been added later, so I'm going to kind of separate it. And obviously we understand that a superscription is different than the body of the song itself. And so in one sense, I can understand versification. Like if you're versifying Psalms, I can understand wanting to put the musical notation, because what information do you find in superscripts? You find historical context, right? You find a little bit of data, historical data, and you also find musical notation. So this is the two types of information you find in a superscript. It will tell you, very rare, sometimes it will tell you the author, Very rarely will it tell you a little bit more of the situation it was written in, like Psalm 51. That's one of the few times we actually get information. It's like this was written by David when he went into Bathsheba after he was confronted by Nathan. But you don't usually get that much historical information. It's usually just author. And then you get musical notation. You get things like to the choir master, or you get things like I read in Psalm 88. Psalm 88 says, to the choir master, according to the Mahalath Le'anot. Does anyone know what that means? No, if you said you did, you're a liar. No one knows what that means. No one knows what that means. We do not know. We know it's musical notation. Some of the terms, like one of the ones you'll have read in your English Bibles, to the Sheminith. To the Sheminith, we don't know what it means technically specifically, but we know what it means like just denotation. It means by eighths. It's a musical notation, by eighths. I mean, I know the number 8 has something to do with music. I don't know enough to know more than that. But even the people who study, we don't know enough to know exactly what these superscripts are telling relative to music. But we know that they are musical notation. I actually think there's witness even in that. And I have time, so I'll talk about that. I think this is not your biggest bedrock of theology, but I think that there is something quite telling about the fact that we know for a fact the Psalms are music. We know for a fact the Psalms are songs. We know for a fact they were used in worship. We know all sorts of things. To the choir master, Selah. We have all sorts of musical terms. We have instrument terms, but we don't know what any of them are. Sometimes we know some of the instruments. But we don't know what they sounded like. I think that's very telling, and I think that's intentional. We have no inspired tunes. We have nothing that anyone could say, this is the tune that you must sing. This is the sound. This is what godly music sounds like. I think that's very telling. We have inspired guarantee there is music in the Bible. You should be singing. You should be engaging in worship. But we have nothing that says, and it needs to sound like this. I think that's telling. But relative to the superscripts, we get historical information, we get musical notation. Another just piece of evidence for, we don't need to get too much into apologetic concerns, but another piece of evidence for the ancientness, the originality of the superscripts is the fact that we don't know what the musical notation words mean. Because as early as the translation of the Bible into Greek, so the translation of the Old Testament into Greek, all happening around, it wasn't all in one shot, but between 250 BC to 150 BC. So around there, all the way up to 50 BC. So in the early 200s, 100s BC is when the Bible is being translated from Hebrew into Greek. By this point, all the Greek translators, the ones, your Hebrew speakers who are translating into Greek, they don't know what any of these words mean anymore. It's lost by that point. But it goes to show you just the ancientness of the superscripts. We have no copies of the Bible without them. They've always been attached. So we do but anyway, I got to go back to the original question that I was answering, that Teresa said. Wouldn't it be nice if we had the historical information? And we get a very tiny amount in the superscripts. And it's intentional. So the information we do get is always important for interpretation. It's always important. Don't ignore the superscripts. But sometimes the information is as little as it's by David. And we're not told anything about the situation that it is. Sometimes we are. It's like by David when he was running from Absalom. But also sometimes we're told, just another bit of evidence for the legitimacy of the superscripts, sometimes we're told it's a situation in David's life that we know nothing about, that is only mentioned in the superscript. I think that happens 3 times. Like in Psalm 7, it's a psalm of David concerning Cush the Benjaminite. We have no idea who that is. He's not mentioned in the text. There's no episode or event with Cush, right? So we don't know what that's about, which is a very strange thing. If you're like forging a superscript, like it's very strange to be like, I'm going to write one and I'm not connecting it to anything. Like if the point of forging a superscript is to connect it to some event in David's life, like you'd pick one people know. So sometimes we're given information that we have no way of filling that out. Like, okay, we know that has to do with Cush, but we don't know anything about this person. We don't know what happened between him and David. We don't know why David is writing a song about him. And This is actually quite intentional. This is actually quite intentional because by and large, the Psalms, even the ones that have very, very detailed superscripts, the very few, like Psalm 51, the lyrics are not detailed. I mean, they're poetically detailed. They're very rich, right? Psalm 51 is incredibly rich and detailed, but it's not detailed about situation. It does not use names. It does not use circumstances. Psalm 51 in the song does not mention Bathsheba. It does not mention adultery. It does not mention murder, right? In the actual lyrics of the song, very, very rarely, there are a couple cases of like historical recounting psalms where like the psalm will recount the history of Israel. We'll talk about the Exodus. We'll talk about things that God has done in the past. And so then it will use historical specifics. But basically, when it comes to like the psalmist's own particular situation, the specifics of whatever the situation is, I'm in trouble. The most specific you ever get is like enemies, like who, never a specific named, foe, never. Again, enemies is the closest you get. You're like, oh, they're making fun of me. Oh, they're oppressing me. Oh, they're cheating me. They're lying about me. So you get things like that. But again, very, very sparse on actual who, what, why. Why is this the case? Why might this be the case? That it's actually quite intentional that we don't get more details in the lyrics. It's a little more, it's exactly it. These are very intentionally written in such a way that anyone can sing them. Anyone can sing them, right? Obviously, we read and we understand and we're able to apply. I read about Abraham, I read about Moses, I read about David. You're able to read about their specifics and it's given to us for our instruction, right? We are told all Scripture is inspired and breathed out by God and given to us for our instruction. But songs do something different than narratives do, right? Songs have a different function than the history of Abraham's dealings with God. That's given to you to learn and be instructed by, but the songs are given to you to do something different. We already talked about the very nature of engaging the emotions, expressing emotions, shaping the emotional will, shaping the mind, the affections, and that's better done generically. That's better done in a way where you can, when you sing them, you can feel like, I wrote these words. I'm saying this, right? Like, I'm not talking about, when Steve tripped me at work. It's a song everyone can sing. Like, when my friend betrayed me. Oh, if I just say when my friend betrayed me, anyone can now sing that lyric when their friend betrays them. It doesn't, like the name doesn't become a barrier. And you'll notice that the information you get in the Psalms, particularly even the ones that do key you to something specific in David's life, is very, very different. The narratives of Samuel, I think there's only one time. It's in 1 Samuel 13. There's only, I think, there might be more than once, but I think there's only one time in the entire narrative of David's life that tells you how David feels. Only once, I think. It's in 1 Samuel 13, it says David was afraid. I think that's the only, it just says once, like David was afraid. It's the only time in his narratives that it tells you, the narrator tells you what he was feeling. For the rest of it, he's a wall. You don't get to know what it was like inside. You imagine, you certainly imagine. It's impossible not for your brain to think like, oh, what would it have felt like when this is happening, when he's on the run, when Saul's betraying him, when his son is trying to kill him. Like you imagine, but it doesn't tell you. So, Samuel never tells you what faith feels like. You're told that David is acting in faith. You're told that David is doing the right thing or David is doing the wrong thing, but you don't have an inside view. But in the Psalms, it's the exact opposite. We're not concerned with details at all. We're concerned with what it felt like, what it was going through, what faith looks like, what faith feels like, what it sounds like to cry out to God for help. The Samuel might say David cried out to God for help, but then doesn't give you the words. And then the Psalms, well, here's what that sounded like. Here's what that looks like. So in one sense, yes. It feels like, if we had more historical information, it might be helpful. But actually, the amount we're given, particularly in the lyrics, is quite intentional. It is designed to make this more readily singable by anyone at any given point when you're in a similar situation. All right, questions at that point. 5 minutes, what can I do in 5 minutes? Okay, we'll say just a little bit more about the kind of liturgical, the use in worship, the use of the Psalms in worship. So we've got this reality. We consider the fact that we do have information. We have the superscripts. We want to pay attention to those as we read, even though sometimes it's as little as this is by David. But even that is going to be helpful next week, particularly as we consider the book of Psalms as a book, as a whole. That's what we're doing next week. But it's worth keeping the superscripts in mind. It's worth keeping genre in mind, near context, psalm above and below, psalms of like context. And then recognizing the use of the psalm in worship, the use of the psalm as part of liturgy, as part of temple worship. Because that helps you interpretively. That helps you interpretively understand and recognize some of what the Psalms are doing. And this then becomes a general rule for reading the Psalms. And so here's how I'll explain this. The Psalms, and I have yet to find verbiage that I'm super, super happy with explaining this phenomenon. But the Psalms are, and this is particularly when we consider their liturgical context, it helps us see this, their use in worship, in formal worship, right? Their use in at the temple worship. The Psalms are, I'm going to put a bunch of different words up here, and you can pick one that makes the most sense, or come up with a better one and then tell me after class. This is my least favorite, self-referential. They are, that's why I'm going to add more. They are the means of accomplishing what they are talking about. The Psalms, I guess R is not the right one for this one. The Psalms actualize realities. That is, they accomplish things. They don't just talk about things. The Psalms accomplish things. All right, and I confess I do not have a good label for what I'm describing. So I'm going to explain this, and then you'll see what I mean. Some words describe things. Some sentences describe things. Yesterday I had Panda Express for dinner. It was early Father's Day because I knew I'd be busy today. So I just gave you information, okay? I didn't really accomplish much apart from giving you that information. However, if we had a young couple up here and they were saying some things and they were dressed really nice, and then I said, I now pronounce you man and wife. My words did something a little differently, didn't they? I didn't just give information, did I? I did something with my words. I accomplished something. Before I said that they weren't married, now I say it they are. My words did it, right? The Psalms actually do things. They don't just describe things. The most obvious example of this, the most easy to conceptualize example, is when the song lyric is some version of, I will sing, or I will make music. If you're singing the words, I will sing to, that's the totally wrong tune. You know the song I'm thinking of. I will sing to and worship. All right, so if you sing, I will sing to and worship, you're not talking about something you're going to do tomorrow or in an hour. You're not saying you're not expressing a future desire, even though it's put in the future tense when you say, I will sing to. When you sing the words, I will sing to you, God, you're not saying this is something I want to do. You're not saying this is something I'm going to do tomorrow. you're doing it. You're doing it with the song itself. So to sing the lyrics, I will sing to, is not to express information. It's not to express even primarily what you should be doing. It's to actually do it. Any variation of that. I will make music. Because again, tense in Hebrew it could just be I am making music. I am singing, right? You are actually doing it with the words itself. So that's the most obvious case, is when the lyrics themselves say, I will sing, or I am singing, or I am making music. I will clap my hands, I will shout, I will raise, I will slam the tambourines, like all of these things. Those aren't words describing something later. Those are lyrics actualizing the very thing that you are doing in the moment. You are doing it as you sing them. That's true of not just musical words. So, other examples. And this is the case because so many Psalms put them in parallel, right? You'll have a line that says, I will sing, or I am singing, and then the next line says, I am blank. That blank is being accomplished in the act of singing. That is put in parallel for a reason. So one of them is in Psalm 56. I will trust. I will not fear. So I will sing. I will not be afraid. When you sing the lyrics, I will sing. I will not be afraid. You're not saying, like, tomorrow I'm not going to be afraid. You're doing it with the song. You are being brave with the song, the act of singing. Or when you sing, I will make music, I will trust. What you are doing with the song is trusting. The very singing of the song is trusting. Another obvious example of this is when you say something like, I will sacrifice. Because so many of these songs were used in temple worship during a sacrifice. So to sing the lyrics, I will sing, I will bring sacrifice. That's not like tomorrow, you're singing it as you're killing the animal and as you're setting it on the pyre and as you're burning it and standing back. You're singing the song as it's happening. So the song actually becomes the way of accomplishing. And so this is important. This liturgical context, the fact that the Psalms are used in worship help us see that. Because you have the really obvious examples of the lyrics like I will sing, I will make music. You have the next most obvious of lyrics like I will sacrifice, I will any sort of liturgical thing, like I will approach the altar, I will enter into his courts. That you're doing it as you sing those lyrics when you're using those lyrics in liturgical worship. And so you see those, and that lets you know that the songs actually, in many cases, are the means of doing the things you sing about. The Psalms are given to actually accomplish things. Singing the Psalms are part of how you are brave. Singing the songs are part of how you trust God. Singing the songs are part of how you offer him worship, right? They're not just expressing my desire to worship. They're not just expressing my desire to trust. They're not just expressing my desire to not fear. They are the way I actually do it. And so that's important. All right, that's where we'll have to end today. Someone wants one final question? Yes, Desiree. So cross-references, people have been cross-referencing texts for a very, very long time. So your cross-references in your modern Bibles are, one, they're not standardized. So if you have an NASB or an ESV or a New King James, the cross-references aren't going to be identical. They'll largely be the same because cross-referencing has been around forever. But there's no standardized list of this text goes with this. That's a choice of whoever the editors were. It's these are the ones we're going to list. But again, that has been around for a while, meaning people have just been reading the Bible forever. So we have a very long tradition of someone reading a text and being like, that reminds me of this text. The earliest written examples of cross-references that we have are in the Masoretic text. Because in the Masoretic text, you actually have things written in the margin. You have all sorts of things written in the margin, but among others are cross-references. So the earliest written cross-references are the Masoretic text, but your cross-references in your English Bible are not, I mean, a lot of them, I'm sure, are identical to Masoretic ones, but they're not the Masoretic ones or any one particular one. Those are just whoever the editors of that particular Bible translation said, like, yeah, let's put, this is a good cross-reference for this verse.
So they're not inspired.
The cross-references are not inspired.
Point that out to me.
Oh, yes, I did say that to you once. Yes, the cross-references are not inspired. As far as categories are concerned, yes, sometimes it's similar words, or like an identical word. Sometimes it's just, this is the same topic. It reminded whoever put that cross-reference there, this reminds me of this text. And it's more vague than any, that's as far as you can go. You could just say, it just reminded this person of this text, and that's why they listed it as a cross-reference. Then you had one.
It's a completely different topic, but real quickly, you said that the tenses in Hebrew are different. And if I understood right, you said it could be translated I am singing.
Oh, yeah.
The Bible singing.
Yes. Depends on any given line. Yeah.
That's really huge.
Yeah, depending on any given line. I'll talk more about that next week for anyone who cares. I'll do a little bit just on tenses in the song, because actually that's worth it. That's worth it. Just a little bit on verbal tense in Hebrew poetry. So just remind me next week because it's not on my notes. Just a little opening about tenses in poetry. All right, let's close there. Lord, we do thank you so much for the gift of your word, and we do pray that you would just continue to help us understand the Psalms better, understand your word better, and make it fruitful. We thank you so much that you have given us songs to sing and ways by which to trust you, and ways by which to be brave, and ways by which to offer you worship. And we do pray that in reading and in singing these, we would do those things. We would not just hear about them, but we would do them through the singing of the songs as you have intended. And we ask this all in Jesus' name and for his glory. Amen. All right, we are pseudo-dismissed.